What would you do if a single tattoo on your wrist could expose a military conspiracy that had been hidden for over a decade? 25-year-old Kara Dee thought she was just another civilian contractor trying to do her job at Nordwind Air Base in Germany. But when security guards blocked her from entering Hangar 12, and a 3-star general caught sight of the faded unit insignia on her wrist, everything changed. What happened next would unravel one of the most shocking cover-ups in modern. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Military history. Kara Dee's steel-toed boots echoed across the concrete floor of Nordwind Air Base as she made her morning rounds, her brown hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail despite being a civilian contractor. At 25, she had already earned a reputation among the maintenance crews as someone who could diagnose aircraft problems that stumped military mechanics twice her age. Her grandmother's wedding ring hung on a chain around her neck, and a faded military unit tattoo on her left wrist usually remained hidden beneath her long sleeves. The German air base buzzed with activity as NATO forces conducted joint training exercises. Kara worked for Eurotech Aviation Services, a civilian contractor responsible for maintaining the complex avionics systems on military aircraft. While other contractors stuck to their assigned tasks, Kara had an uncanny ability to spot problems that others missed entirely. She could identify electrical faults by the subtle smell of overheated circuits and detect hydraulic pressure issues from the slightest changes in engine sound. Her colleagues at Eurotech treated her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Despite her young age, Kara possessed an almost supernatural understanding of aircraft systems. She had joined the company 18 months ago, arriving with impeccable technical credentials but refusing to discuss her previous experience. Her supervisor, Hans Mueller, had stopped questioning her expertise after she prevented 3 potentially catastrophic maintenance failures in her first 6 months. The other contractors often gathered around her workstation during breaks, listening, as she explained complex technical concepts with the precision of someone who had received far more training than any civilian maintenance school could provide. Her knowledge of military aircraft specifications, classified communication systems, and advanced weaponry protocols raised eyebrows, but Kara deflected personal questions with professional courtesy and quick changes of subject. What none of her colleagues knew was that Kara's expertise came from 5 years of active military service in an elite special operations unit that officially didn't exist. The unit tattoo on her wrist bore the insignia of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron, a classified intelligence gathering unit that had operated in some of the world's most dangerous locations. The tattoo was supposed to have been removed when she left the military, but Kara had refused the procedure, claiming medical complications prevented the laser treatment. Her morning routine at Nordwind was methodical and thorough. She began each day by reviewing maintenance logs, checking for patterns that might indicate systematic problems. Her trained eye could spot discrepancies that suggested tampering, unauthorized modifications, or equipment failures that had been inadequately addressed. This attention to detail had made her invaluable to Eurotech, but it had also begun to attract unwanted attention from military security personnel. As she walked past Hangar 12, Kara noticed increased security presence around the restricted facility. Military police had established additional checkpoints, and she observed personnel entering and leaving with the kind of urgency that suggested classified operations. Her instincts, honed by years of intelligence work, told her something significant was happening inside that hangar. The base's morning briefing for contractors was routine, covering safety protocols and maintenance schedules. But Kara noticed subtle changes in the security arrangements. Certain areas that had been accessible to civilian contractors were now restricted to military personnel only. Communication systems that she had been authorized to maintain were suddenly transferred to military-only technicians. The pattern reminded her of operational security measures she had seen during sensitive missions. After the briefing, Kara returned to her assigned workstation in the main maintenance facility. Her current project involved upgrading navigation systems on a fleet of transport aircraft, work that required access to detailed technical specifications and classified equipment manuals. She had been working on these systems for 3 weeks, building a comprehensive understanding of their capabilities and vulnerabilities. As she powered up her diagnostic equipment, Kara's trained eye caught something unusual in the aircraft's electronic signatures. The navigation system showed anomalies that suggested unauthorized access or modification. The patterns were subtle, professional, and almost undetectable to anyone without extensive intelligence training. But to Kara, they were as obvious as flashing warning lights. Her military training had taught her to trust her instincts, and everything about this situation felt wrong. The increased security, the restricted access, and now evidence of system tampering created a picture that reminded her of operations she had encountered during her classified service. Whatever was happening at Nordwind Air Base, it was bigger than routine maintenance and training exercises. The nightmares still came without warning, usually triggered by the sound of helicopter rotors or the smell of diesel fuel. Kara would find herself back in the mountains of Afghanistan 3 years earlier, watching her unit's aircraft disappear into a fireball that lit up the night sky. 7 members of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron had died in what the official reports called a catastrophic mechanical failure during a routine intelligence gathering mission. But Kara knew the truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous. She had been the unit's lead technical specialist, responsible for maintaining the highly classified electronic warfare systems that made their covert operations possible. The 47th operated aircraft that didn't officially exist, conducting surveillance missions that were never recorded in any public military records. Their work involved gathering intelligence on terrorist networks, monitoring weapons trafficking, and providing technical support for special operations forces operating in denied areas. The night of the crash, Kara had been grounded due to a minor injury sustained during a previous mission. She watched from the base operations center as her teammates took off in their modified aircraft, loaded with sophisticated surveillance equipment and electronic countermeasures. The mission was supposed to be routine, a 6-hour reconnaissance, flight over known terrorist supply routes, gathering signals intelligence and photographic evidence. But something had gone wrong 40 minutes into the flight. The aircraft's communication systems had gone silent, and all tracking signals had disappeared simultaneously. Search and rescue teams found the wreckage 18 hours later, scattered across a remote valley with no survivors. The official investigation concluded that multiple system failures had caused the crash, but Kara's technical analysis of the recovered equipment told a different story. The electronic warfare systems showed signs of external interference, suggesting that someone had remotely accessed the aircraft's control systems. The navigation computers had been wiped clean, but Kara's forensic analysis revealed traces of unauthorized code that could have compromised the aircraft's flight controls. Most disturbing was evidence that the aircraft's secure communication systems had been transmitting data to an unknown location just before the crash. When Kara presented her findings to her commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Morrison, she was told that the investigation was complete and that her analysis was speculative and unhelpful. Morrison ordered her to destroy all copies of her technical reports and to never discuss her findings with anyone. When Kara requested permission to continue her investigation, she was denied access to the classified evidence and informed that her security clearance was being reviewed. Within 2 weeks, Kara found herself transferred to a desk job at a stateside military base, effectively ending her operational career. Her repeated requests for information about the crash investigation were denied, and her attempts to contact the families of her deceased teammates were blocked by military legal personnel. The message was clear: the 47th Technical Reconnaissance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Squadron had never existed, and its members had never died in Afghanistan. The final insult came when Kara was forced to undergo what the military called career transition counseling. A psychologist informed her that her grief over the loss of her teammates was affecting her judgment and her ability to serve effectively. The recommendation was immediate discharge from military service, with full benefits and a letter of recommendation. For civilian employment, the alternative, she was told, would be a psychiatric evaluation that could result in a dishonorable discharge. Kara chose to leave the military with her dignity intact, but she never stopped believing that her teammates had been murdered to cover up something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The unit tattoo on her wrist served as a daily reminder of the 7 people who had died for the truth, and her promise to discover what had really happened to them. Finding work as a civilian contractor had been easier than expected. Her technical skills were in high demand, and her military experience made her valuable to companies working on defense contracts. But Kara had chosen her assignments carefully, always looking for opportunities to access military installations and classified systems. She was searching for connections to the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron and evidence of the conspiracy that had killed her teammates. Eurotech Aviation Services had seemed like the perfect cover. The company maintained aircraft and systems at military bases across Europe, providing Kara with access to classified facilities and the military bases across Europe, opportunity to investigate military operations without attracting attention. For 18 months, she had worked diligently, building her reputation while quietly gathering information about covert military programs. Now, at Nordwind Air Base, she was seeing patterns that reminded her of the intelligence operations she had conducted with the 47th. The security measures, the classified aircraft, and the evidence of system tampering all suggested that someone was running operations similar to those that had gotten her teammates killed. The question was whether she was looking at the same conspiracy that had destroyed her unit, or if she had stumbled onto something equally dangerous. The faded tattoo on her wrist seemed to burn as she remembered her promise to her fallen teammates. She had sworn to find the truth about their deaths, no matter how long it took or how dangerous it became. At Nordwind Air Base, surrounded by classified aircraft and military secrets, Kara felt closer to that truth than she had been in 3 years. The navigation system anomalies were subtle but unmistakable to someone with Kara's training. As she ran diagnostic tests on the transport aircraft's electronic systems, her computer screens displayed patterns that made her pulse quicken with recognition. The modifications weren't random equipment failures or standard maintenance issues. They were deliberate alterations designed to create backdoor access to the aircraft's control systems. Her fingers moved quickly across the diagnostic keyboard, accessing deeper levels of the aircraft's software architecture. What she found there made her blood run cold. Hidden within the navigation code were the same electronic signatures she had discovered in the wreckage of her unit's aircraft 3 years ago. Someone was using identical modification techniques to compromise military aircraft systems, and they were doing it right here at Nordwind Air Base. Kara's military training had taught her to document everything, so she began systematically photographing the anomalous code sequences and system modifications. She used her personal camera, a small digital device that looked like standard contractor equipment, but was actually a sophisticated intelligence-gathering tool she had retained from her military service. Each photograph captured technical details that would be meaningless to casual observers, but would provide crucial evidence to anyone with signals intelligence expertise. The deeper she dug into the aircraft systems, the more disturbing the picture became. The modifications weren't limited to navigation systems. They extended to communication equipment, flight control computers, and even the aircraft's weapon systems. Someone had essentially installed a complete remote control capability, allowing external operators to take control of the aircraft during flight. The implications were staggering. During her lunch break, Kara walked the perimeter of the base, ostensibly getting fresh air, but actually conducting reconnaissance on the restricted areas surrounding Hangar 12. Her trained eye noted the placement of security cameras, the patterns of guard rotations, and the types of vehicles entering and leaving the classified facility. Everything she observed suggested that Hangar 12 was the center of whatever operation was taking place at Nordwind. She also observed the personnel who had access to the restricted areas. Most were standard military personnel, but several civilians moved through the security checkpoints with the casual confidence of people who belonged there. These individuals didn't wear standard contractor identification, and their access badges were different from the ones issued to Eurotech employees. Kara memorized their faces and noted their movement patterns, building a mental map of the operations personnel structure. That afternoon, she returned to her workstation and began cross-referencing the aircraft system modifications with her memories of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron's final mission. The technical signatures were too similar to be coincidental. Someone was using the same electronic warfare techniques that had been employed against her unit in Afghanistan. The question was whether this was the same group or if the technology had been copied and distributed to other operators. Her investigation was interrupted by Hans Mueller, her supervisor, who approached her workstation with an expression of concern. "Kara, I've received some unusual requests from base security about your work," he said, keeping his voice low. "They want copies of all your diagnostic reports and maintenance logs. They're also asking about your background and qualifications." Kara felt a familiar chill of recognition. The pattern was exactly the same as what had happened after she had questioned the official investigation into her unit's crash. First came the security inquiries, then the restrictions on access, and finally the attempts to discredit or silence anyone who asked inconvenient questions. She realized that her investigation had already been noticed by whoever was running the operation at Nordwind. "Did they say why they need the reports?" she asked, maintaining her professional composure while her mind raced through possible responses. "They claim it's routine security verification for contractors working on classified systems," Mueller replied. "But I've never seen this level of scrutiny for maintenance personnel. They're treating you like you're applying for a high-level security clearance." Kara nodded thoughtfully, already formulating her next moves. She needed to accelerate her investigation before security restrictions cut off her access to the evidence. More importantly, she needed to find a way to get inside Hangar 12 and discover what was really happening there. The aircraft modifications she had discovered were just the beginning. The real answers lay in whatever operation was being conducted in that classified facility. That evening, she remained at her workstation after most of the other contractors had left for the day. Working by the light of her computer screen, she compiled a comprehensive technical report documenting all the system modifications she had discovered. She encrypted the files using military-grade security protocols and transmitted copies to secure servers she had established during her intelligence career. If something happened to her, the evidence would survive. As she prepared to leave the base, Kara made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow she would find a way to access Hangar 12, regardless of the security restrictions. Her teammates had died because someone was using military aircraft for illegal operations, and she was not going to let their sacrifice be meaningless. The truth was somewhere in that hangar, and she was going to find it. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Kara arrived at her workstation to find a message from base security, requesting her immediate presence in the contractor administration office. The tone was formal and official, but she recognized the underlying threat from her military experience. Someone had decided that her investigation was becoming problematic. Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan, The base security commander was waiting for her with a file folder that undoubtedly contained her complete background information. His expression was coldly professional, the kind of look that military officers reserve for people they considered security risks. Beside him sat a civilian in an expensive suit who didn't introduce himself but clearly held authority over the proceedings. "Ms. Dee," Brennan began, his German accented English precise and clipped, "we need to discuss some concerns about your recent work activities. It's come to our attention that you've been accessing aircraft systems beyond your assigned maintenance scope." Kara maintained her composure, drawing on years of military training in how to handle hostile interrogations. "Sir, I was conducting routine diagnostic tests on navigation systems as specified in my work orders. If there are concerns about my procedures, I'm happy to clarify any misunderstandings." The unnamed civilian leaned forward slightly, his pale blue eyes studying her with the intensity of a professional interrogator. "Ms. Dee, your technical qualifications are impressive, but we're concerned about your motivations. You've been asking questions about classified systems that don't relate to your contracted duties. I've been identifying potential system vulnerabilities and security risks," Kara replied firmly. "I assumed that would be valuable information for base security." Brennan opened the file folder and spread several documents across the desk. Kara recognized them as copies of her diagnostic reports and maintenance logs, but also more sensitive materials including her military service record and psychological evaluation reports from her discharge processing. They had been conducting a comprehensive background investigation. "Your military service record raises interesting questions," the civilian continued. "You were discharged following a psychological evaluation that questioned your judgment and emotional stability. Are you certain you're interpreting these technical anomalies correctly?" The attack was personal and professional, designed to undermine her credibility by suggesting that her concerns were the product of psychological problems rather than legitimate technical expertise. Kara had seen this tactic used against other military personnel who had questioned official narratives about classified operations. "My discharge was related to grief counseling following the loss of my unit," she replied carefully. "My technical qualifications and professional performance speak for themselves." Lieutenant Colonel Brennan retrieved a document from his folder and placed it in front of her. "This is a modified work assignment that restricts your access to sensitive systems. Effective immediately, you'll be limited to basic maintenance tasks under direct supervision. Your diagnostic equipment access is suspended pending completion of a comprehensive security review." Kara scanned the document, recognizing it as a professionally crafted bureaucratic trap. The new restrictions would prevent her from continuing her investigation while providing legal cover for the security actions. If she refused to sign, she would be terminated for insubordination. If she agreed, she would be effectively neutralized as a threat to whatever operation was taking place at Nordwind. "Is this related to my identification of potential security vulnerabilities in the aircraft systems?" she asked, making her concerns part of the official record. The civilian's expression didn't change, but Karen noticed his fingers tapping silently on the desk, a tell that suggested he was more concerned about her discoveries than he was letting on. "Ms. Dee, your role is to perform maintenance tasks as assigned by your supervisor. Security analysis is conducted by qualified military personnel, not civilian contractors, even when those contractors have more relevant experience and training than the military personnel." Kara asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Both men knew from her service record that she had operated at classification levels far above their current positions, but acknowledging that fact would legitimize her concerns about the system modifications she had discovered. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan closed the file folder with a sharp snap. "Ms. Dee, you have two choices. Sign the modified work assignment and continue your employment under the new restrictions, or we can terminate your contract for exceeding your authorized scope of work. Kara looked at the document again, weighing her options. Signing would allow her to remain at Nordwind Air Base, but would severely limit her ability to investigate the conspiracy. Refusing would end her access to the evidence, but might force them to reveal more about their motivations for silencing her. I need to review this with my supervisor and my company's legal department, she said finally. I assume I have reasonable time to consider the implications. The civilian spoke for the first time in several minutes. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. If you choose to remain at Nordwind, you'll work under the new restrictions. If you choose to leave, your contract will be terminated immediately with appropriate references for your technical competence. As Kara stood to leave, she noticed that both men were watching her hands. She realized they were looking for her unit tattoo, trying to determine if she had any visible military identification that might explain her expertise. Her long sleeves concealed the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron insignia, but their interest confirmed that they were concerned about her military background. Walking back to her workstation, Kara understood that she had reached a critical decision point. The security restrictions were designed to prevent her from discovering more about the aircraft modifications and the operation in Hangar 12, but they had also revealed that her investigation was close to something important enough to justify significant resources to stop her. Tomorrow she would have to choose between safety and the truth about what had happened to her teammates. The next morning, Kara arrived at Nordwind Air Base to find her access card had been deactivated. The security checkpoint scanner flashed red, and the guard informed her that she needed to report to the contractor administration office before being allowed on base. The message was clear. They were tightening control over her movements and access to sensitive areas in the administration office. Hans Mueller looked uncomfortable as he handed her a revised contract with the new security restrictions. Kara, I want you to know that I disagree with these limitations, he said quietly. Your technical expertise has been invaluable to our operations here. But the base security commander has made it clear that these restrictions are non-negotiable. Kara scanned the document, noting how comprehensively it limited her access to aircraft systems. She would be restricted to basic mechanical maintenance under direct supervision, with no access to electronic systems, diagnostic equipment, or aircraft computers. The restrictions were so severe that they would essentially reduce her to the level of an entry-level technician. Hans, you know this doesn't make sense from a technical standpoint, she said, looking up from the contract. Half of these aircraft systems require someone with my level of expertise to maintain properly. You're going to have problems that your other technicians can't solve. Mueller nodded grimly. I know, but Lieutenant Colonel Brennan was very specific about the security concerns. He mentioned that civilian contractors have been accessing classified systems without proper authorization. He seemed to think you were the primary example of this problem. As Kara signed the modified contract, she noticed that her new supervisor would be Staff Sergeant Eric Volkov, a young military technician who had arrived at Nordwind only 2 weeks earlier. The timing was suspicious. Volkov had been assigned to the base just as her investigation was beginning to uncover significant evidence. She suspected he had been specifically chosen to monitor her activities. Her first day under the new restrictions was deliberately humiliating. Volkov assigned her to basic maintenance tasks that required no technical expertise, cleaning equipment, organizing tools, and performing routine inspections that any mechanic could handle. When she attempted to point out potential problems with aircraft systems, she was told to stick to assigned duties and avoid making observations about equipment she wasn't authorized to examine. During her lunch break, Kara walked past Hangar 12 and noticed increased activity around the facility. Several unmarked civilian vehicles were parked outside, and personnel in business suits were entering and leaving the restricted area. She recognized some faces from her earlier surveillance, but there were also new individuals who clearly held positions of authority. Something significant was happening inside that hangar. That afternoon, she discovered that her access to the base computer network had been restricted. Her login credentials would only allow her to access basic maintenance, schedules, and equipment manuals. The diagnostic software she had been using to analyze aircraft systems was no longer available to her, and her previous work files had been moved to a restricted server that required special authorization to access. The systematic isolation was professionally implemented and clearly designed to prevent her from continuing her investigation. But Kara noticed that the restrictions were too comprehensive to be standard security measures. They were specifically targeting her capabilities and preventing her from accessing the tools she needed to analyze the aircraft modifications she had discovered. Staff Sergeant Volkov approached her workstation near the end of the day, carrying a folder of new work assignments. "Dee, tomorrow you'll be working on routine maintenance for the transport aircraft in Hangar 3. Basic mechanical systems only, no electronics, no computers, no diagnostic equipment." "Sergeant, that's not an efficient use of my technical qualifications," Kara replied carefully. "I have expertise in advanced avionics that could be valuable for more complex maintenance tasks." Volkov's expression was coldly professional. "Your technical qualifications are noted in your file, but security concerns take precedence over efficiency. You'll work on assigned tasks under direct supervision, and you'll limit your activities to exactly what's specified in your work orders." The conversation was clearly being conducted for the benefit of listening devices, establishing an official record of Kara's compliance with the security restrictions. But Volkov's body language suggested he was uncomfortable with the assignment, possibly indicating that he was following orders rather than implementing his own security concerns. That evening, Kara remained at her workstation after most of the other contractors had left. She used her personal laptop to review the technical documentation she had compiled during her investigation, looking for patterns and connections that might help her understand the full scope of the operation at Nordwind. The evidence was compelling, but she needed more information to connect the aircraft modifications to the broader conspiracy. As she prepared to leave the base, Kara made a decision that would escalate the conflict. She would find a way to access Hangar 12 and discover what was really happening there, regardless of the security restrictions. Her teammates had died because someone was using military technology for illegal operations, and she was not going to let bureaucratic obstacles prevent her from exposing the truth. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Kara performed routine maintenance tasks under Staff Sergeant Volkov's supervision, she noticed that he was asking technical questions that went beyond simple oversight. His queries about aircraft systems were sophisticated and indicated a level of expertise that contradicted his official role as a basic maintenance supervisor. "Sergeant, your questions suggest you have advanced training in avionics systems," Kara observed during a break in their work. "That's unusual for someone assigned to supervise basic maintenance tasks." Volkov looked around carefully before responding, his voice lowered to prevent their conversation from being overheard. "I have a background in signals intelligence and electronic warfare systems. I was assigned to this position specifically because of my technical expertise." The admission was significant. Volkov was revealing that his assignment to supervise her was not routine, but part of a deliberate strategy to monitor her activities. However, his willingness to discuss his background suggested that he might have concerns about the situation at Nordwind. "Eric, can I ask you something off the record?" Kara said, using his first name to establish a personal connection. "What do you know about the operations in Hangar 12? Volkov's expression became guarded, but he didn't immediately refuse to answer. "I know that there are classified activities taking place there. I also know that several personnel have raised concerns about security protocols and equipment modifications." Those concerns have been systematically dismissed or suppressed. The revelation was exactly what Kara had been hoping to hear. Volkov was indicating that she wasn't the only person who had noticed problems with the operations at Nordwind. Other military personnel had identified security risks and system modifications, but their concerns had been ignored or covered up. "Have you seen the aircraft modification patterns I documented in my diagnostic reports?" she asked carefully. Volkov paused for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks of continuing their conversation. "I've reviewed your technical analysis. Your conclusions about unauthorized system access and remote control capabilities are consistent with my own observations. The modification signatures match patterns I've seen in classified intelligence reports." Kara felt a surge of validation. Finally, someone with relevant expertise was confirming her technical analysis and acknowledging the security implications of what she had discovered. Volkov's background in signals intelligence gave him the knowledge necessary to understand the significance of the aircraft modifications. "Eric, I need to tell you something about my background," she said, making a decision that could change everything. "I served in a classified unit that conducted similar operations. 3 years ago, my teammates were killed when their aircraft was remotely controlled and crashed. I believe the same technology is being used here at Nordwind." Volkov's eyes widened as he processed the implications of her revelation. "You're saying that what happened to your unit is connected to the operations here?" "I'm saying that the electronic signatures are identical. Someone is using the same remote control technology that killed my teammates, and they're doing it right here at this base." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, who approached their workstation with an expression of suspicion. "Sergeant Volkov, I need to speak with you privately about the contractor supervision protocols." As the two men walked away for their private conversation, Kara realized that her growing alliance with Volkov had been noticed by base security. The timing of Brennan's interruption suggested that their conversation had been monitored, possibly through electronic surveillance or human observation. When Volkov returned 20 minutes later, his demeanor had changed significantly. He was more formal and distant, clearly having been given specific instructions about how to interact with her. But when he handed her the next work assignment, he briefly made eye contact and nodded slightly, a subtle signal that he remained sympathetic to her concerns despite the official pressure. That afternoon, Volkov found an opportunity to speak with her privately while they were working in a section of the hangar that was not under direct surveillance. "Kara, I've been told to report any conversations we have that go beyond routine work supervision. But I want you to know that I believe your technical analysis is correct." "What did Brennan tell you?" she asked. "He said that you're emotionally unstable due to your military service and that you're seeing conspiracy theories where none exist. He ordered me to document any statements you make about classified operations or security concerns." Kara nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern of discrediting tactics. "Eric, they're using the same techniques that were used to silence other personnel who questioned this operation. The goal is to make it seem like I'm psychologically unreliable rather than technically competent. I understand. But I also understand that people with your level of expertise don't make the kind of technical errors that would explain away what you've discovered. The aircraft modifications are real, and they represent a significant security risk." That evening, as Kara prepared to leave the base, Volkov approached her with a small piece of paper. "There's something you should know about the personnel who have access to Hangar 12. I've been keeping track of their movement patterns and security protocols. If you're interested in understanding the full scope of the operation, this information might be helpful." The paper contained a detailed schedule of personnel movements around the restricted facility, including times when security was reduced and opportunities for closer observation. Volkov was providing her with intelligence that could help her investigate the conspiracy despite the official orders to limit her access and monitor her activities. 2 days later, Kara was working on routine maintenance tasks in Hangar 3 when she noticed unusual activity in the adjacent administrative building. Through the thin walls, she could hear raised voices coming from what she knew was Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's office. The conversation was heated enough that individual words were becoming audible, and her intelligence training had taught her to recognize when seemingly routine discussions contained valuable information. She moved closer to the wall, separating the maintenance area from the administrative offices, positioning herself behind a large equipment cabinet where she could listen without being observed. The voices belonged to Brennan and the unnamed civilian who had been present during her security interview. Their conversation was intense and clearly related to operational security concerns. "The Dee situation is becoming problematic," Brennan was saying, his voice carrying the tension of someone under pressure from higher authorities. "She's asking questions about systems that she shouldn't understand, and her technical analysis is too accurate to dismiss as civilian speculation." "Her background explains her expertise," the civilian replied. The 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron was involved in highly classified operations. She has knowledge that makes her dangerous to operational security. Kara's heart stopped. They were discussing her former unit by name, confirming that her investigation had touched on classified operations that were still active. More importantly, they were acknowledging that the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron's work was directly connected to whatever was happening at Nordwind Air Base. "The 47th was officially disbanded 3 years ago," Brennan continued. "All personnel were reassigned or discharged. How does one former member pose a threat to current operations?" "Because she understands the technology," the civilian explained. "The remote aircraft control systems we developed during the Afghan operations are still in use. If she connects the electronic signatures to the current program, she could expose the entire operation." The revelation hit Kara like a physical blow. They were admitting that her unit's aircraft had been remotely controlled during the fatal mission, and that the same technology was being used for ongoing operations at Nordwind. Her teammates had been murdered to protect a classified program that was still operating illegally. The crash in Afghanistan was necessary to maintain operational security, the civilian continued. The 47th had discovered unauthorized modifications to their aircraft systems. Marcus Chun and his team were preparing to report their findings to congressional oversight committees. The decision was made to eliminate the threat before it compromised the entire program. Kara pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself as she heard the names of her deceased teammates. Marcus Chun had been the unit's lead pilot, a meticulous professional who had questioned the unusual behavior of their aircraft systems. During the final weeks before the crash, he had been organizing the team's concerns about potential security breaches and unauthorized modifications. 7 people died to protect this program, Brennan said quietly. Was it worth it? The technology has been used successfully in dozens of operations since then, the civilian replied. Intelligence gathering, targeted eliminations, and strategic disruption of enemy operations. The sacrifice of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron has saved thousands of lives. The conversation revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Her unit had been deliberately killed to prevent them from exposing illegal remote control operations, and the technology had been used for ongoing classified missions. The aircraft modifications she had discovered at Nordwind were part of a continuing program that had been operating for 3 years since her teammates' deaths. "What about the current security risk?" Brennan asked. "Dee has documented evidence of the system modifications. If she shares that information with the wrong people, we could face congressional investigations and criminal charges." "The evidence can be discredited," the civilian said. "Her psychological evaluation during military discharge provides justification for dismissing her claims as delusional." We've used that strategy successfully with other personnel who have raised concerns about classified operations. Kara realized they were discussing a systematic pattern of silencing military personnel who questioned illegal operations. Her case wasn't unique. Other people had discovered evidence of the conspiracy and had been discredited or eliminated to protect the program. There's another problem, Brennan continued. Staff Sergeant Volkov has been asking questions about her technical analysis. He has the expertise to validate her findings, and his security clearance gives him access to classified information. That could corroborate her claims. Volkov will be transferred to another assignment within the week, the civilian replied. His replacement will be someone who understands the importance of operational security over technical curiosity. The conversation was revealing the full scope of the institutional cover-up. They were planning to remove Volkov because he had supported her technical analysis, and they were preparing to replace him with someone who would prioritize secrecy over security concerns. "Sir, what if she refuses to be silenced?" Brennan asked. "Her military background suggests she won't abandon her investigation easily." There was a long pause before the civilian responded. The 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron faced the same choice 3 years ago. They chose to pursue the truth despite warnings about the consequences. We know how that ended. The implied threat was unmistakable. They were suggesting that Kara could face the same fate as her teammates if she continued her investigation. The conspiracy had killed 7 people to protect their illegal operations, and they were prepared to kill again to maintain their secrecy. As the conversation concluded and footsteps indicated that the men were leaving the office, Kara remained hidden behind the equipment cabinet, her mind racing through the implications of what she had learned. The conspiracy was larger and more dangerous than she had imagined, and it was still actively operating. Her teammates had died because they had discovered the truth, and now she was walking the same path toward the same dangerous revelation. That evening, Kara sat in her small off-base apartment, staring at the intelligence schedule that Volkov had provided while processing the devastating revelations from the overheard conversation. The conspiracy had killed her teammates to protect an illegal remote control program, and the same technology was being used for ongoing operations at Nordwind Air Base. She now had confirmation that her investigation was not only correct, but had identified an active threat to military personnel and national security. Using her secure laptop, she began documenting everything she had learned, creating an encrypted file that contained her technical analysis, photographs of the aircraft modifications, and detailed notes about the personnel and operations she had observed. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, but she knew that without additional proof, her claims would be dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a psychologically unstable former military member. She needed to get inside Hangar 12 and document the actual operations taking place there. The intelligence provided by Volkov showed that security was reduced during shift changes, particularly during the early morning hours when personnel rotations created brief windows of reduced surveillance. If she could access the facility and gather photographic evidence of the illegal operations, she would have proof that even the most sophisticated cover-up couldn't discredit. The next morning, Kara arrived at Nordwind Air Base earlier than usual, using her legitimate work schedule to establish her presence before attempting to access the restricted areas. She carried her standard maintenance equipment bag, but hidden. Inside were specialized tools she had retained from her intelligence career, lockpicks, electronic surveillance devices, and a military-grade camera capable of documenting technical details in low-light conditions. Staff Sergeant Volkov was waiting for her at the maintenance facility, his expression grim with concern. "Kara, I received transfer orders last night. I'm being reassigned to a base in Poland, effective immediately. My replacement will arrive this afternoon." The timing confirmed what she had heard during the overheard conversation. They were removing Volkov because he had supported her technical analysis and provided her with intelligence about the restricted operations. His transfer was part of the systematic effort to isolate her from anyone who might validate her findings. "Eric, before you leave, I need to tell you what I discovered yesterday," she said, quickly explaining what she had overheard about the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron and the ongoing illegal operations. Volkov's face reflected the shock and horror of learning that military personnel had been murdered to protect a classified program. "Kara, if what you're saying is true, then this conspiracy involves people at the highest levels of military command. Exposing this will be extremely dangerous." "My teammates died because they tried to expose the truth," she replied. "I won't let their sacrifice be meaningless. But I need more evidence before I can take this to authorities who might actually investigate rather than cover it up." Volkov nodded grimly. "The schedule I gave you shows that security is minimal during the 400 to 0500 shift change. If you're going to access Hangar 12, that's your best opportunity. But Kara, if you're caught, they'll have justification for terminating your contract and removing you from the base permanently. If I don't gather the evidence, the conspiracy will continue and more people will die," she said. "I have to try." That afternoon, Volkov's replacement arrived as scheduled. Master Sergeant Lisa Weber was a career military police officer with a reputation for strict adherence to security protocols. Her first action was to review Kara's work assignments and implement even more restrictive supervision measures. The message was clear: the new supervisor would not tolerate any deviation from assigned duties. During her final conversation with Volkov before his departure, he provided her with additional intelligence that would be crucial for her planned infiltration of Hangar 12. "The facility has 3 levels," he explained quietly. "The main floor contains standard aircraft maintenance operations. The basement level houses the electronic warfare systems and remote control equipment. The upper level contains the command and control center where the actual operations are conducted." "Which level would have the most damaging evidence?" Kara asked. "The basement level contains the technical systems that you could document and analyze. The upper level contains the operational records and personnel files that would prove the conspiracy. If you can access both levels, you'll have evidence that no cover-up could discredit." That evening, Kara prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous operation of her career. She reviewed the facility layout, planned her entry and exit routes, and prepared her equipment for documenting whatever she found inside Hangar 12. The intelligence gathered during her weeks of observation had provided her with detailed knowledge of security protocols, personnel patterns, and facility access points. She also prepared for the possibility that she might not survive the operation. Using secure communication protocols she had learned during her intelligence career, she transmitted copies of all her evidence to secure servers located outside military control. If something happened to her, the truth about the conspiracy would still be available to investigators who might pursue justice for her teammates. As she tried to sleep before the early morning operation, Kara thought about Marcus Chun and the other members of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron. They had died because they had chosen courage over convenience, truth over safety. Tomorrow she would honor their memory by risking everything to expose the conspiracy that had killed them. The unit tattoo on her wrist seemed to pulse with significance as she prepared for the mission that would either bring justice to her fallen teammates or cost her the same price they had paid for pursuing the truth. At 0347 hours, Kara made her move toward Hangar 12, using the maintenance tunnels beneath Nordwind Air Base to avoid surface security patrols. Her intelligence training had taught her to exploit the blind spots in security systems, and the early morning shift change provided exactly the window of opportunity she needed. The tunnels were dimly lit and filled with the mechanical sounds of the base's infrastructure, providing perfect cover for her approach to the restricted facility. She had memorized Volkov's intelligence about the facility layout and security protocols, But nothing could have prepared her for what she discovered when she reached the basement level of Hangar 12. Through a ventilation grate, she could see a sophisticated command center filled with military personnel operating equipment that she recognized from her time with the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron. They were conducting active remote control operations on aircraft that were currently in flight. Kara carefully photographed the command center, documenting the personnel, equipment, and operational displays. The screens showed real-time telemetry from multiple aircraft, with operators making course corrections and system modifications from their ground-based stations. This was exactly the type of operation that had killed her teammates: unauthorized remote control of military aircraft for classified missions. But as she prepared to move to the upper level of the facility, an emergency alarm began sounding. Throughout the base, red lights flashed in the corridors, and she could hear the urgent voice of the base commander over the public address system. All personnel report to emergency stations. We have a priority Alpha security incident in progress. Through her hidden position, Kara watched as the personnel in the command center reacted with obvious panic. The operational displays showed that one of their remotely controlled aircraft had lost communication and was flying erratically over civilian airspace. The operators were frantically attempting to regain control, but their remote systems had been compromised or had malfunctioned. "Contact Vector 7 has gone silent," one of the operators reported to his supervisor. "All command signals are being rejected. The aircraft is not responding to remote control inputs. Switch to emergency override protocols," the supervisor ordered. "We cannot allow that aircraft to crash in a populated area. The operational security implications would be catastrophic." Kara realized she was witnessing exactly the type of crisis that had killed her teammates. The remote control systems were unreliable and dangerous, capable of causing aircraft crashes that would be blamed on pilot error or mechanical failure. The difference was that this time, the aircraft was flying over German civilian territory, where a crash would create international incidents and investigations that the conspiracy couldn't control. The emergency situation provided her with an unexpected opportunity. While the personnel in the command center were focused on the crisis, she could access areas of the facility that would normally be heavily guarded. More importantly, the operational emergency was creating exactly the type of evidence she needed to prove that the conspiracy was actively endangering lives. Using her military expertise, Kara accessed the facility's upper level through a maintenance shaft that connected to the building's ventilation system. The command and control center was in chaos, with senior officers arriving to assess the crisis and coordinate emergency response. She positioned herself where she could photograph the operational records and personnel files that Volkov had described. Documents she found exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Detailed mission records showed that the remote control program had been operating continuously for 3 years, conducting hundreds of unauthorized flights over civilian airspace in multiple countries. The files contained evidence of aircraft crashes that had been attributed to pilot error, but were actually the result of remote control system failures. Most damaging were the personnel records that documented the systematic elimination of military members who had questioned the program. Her unit's crash was listed alongside 17 other security incidents, where personnel who had discovered the illegal operations had been silenced through transfer, discharge, or elimination. The conspiracy had killed dozens of people to protect their operations. As she photographed the most damaging documents, Kara heard footsteps approaching the command center. Through a partially open door, she could see Lieutenant Colonel Brennan arriving with a team of senior officers, their faces grim with the knowledge that their illegal operations had created a crisis that could expose everything. "Status report," Brennan demanded as he entered the command center. "Sir, we've lost control of aircraft designation Romeo 7, the operations supervisor reported. "The aircraft is currently flying erratically over the Munich metropolitan area. Estimated fuel. Remaining is 43 minutes. Can we regain control? Negative, sir. All remote command systems have been compromised. The aircraft's autopilot is malfunctioning, and the backup systems are not responding. Kara understood the implications immediately. They had an unmanned aircraft flying out of control over one of Germany's largest cities with less than an hour of fuel remaining. When the fuel was exhausted, the aircraft would crash, potentially killing hundreds of civilians and creating an international incident that would trigger investigations into the entire remote control program. Sir, another officer spoke up. We need qualified personnel who understand both the aircraft systems and the remote control technology. The standard flight crews don't have the expertise to resolve this type of crisis. Brennan's expression showed the desperation of someone facing the collapse of everything he had worked to protect. Get me a list of all personnel on base with relevant expertise. We need someone who can either regain remote control or talk the aircraft through an emergency landing. As Kara listened to their conversation, she realized that the crisis had created an opportunity she hadn't expected. They needed someone with exactly her expertise, knowledge of both aircraft systems and remote control technology. The same specialized training that had made her dangerous to their conspiracy now made her essential to preventing a catastrophic aircraft crash over civilian territory. General Morrison's recognition of Kara's unit tattoo had transformed the atmosphere in the command center, but the immediate crisis demanded her full attention. The aircraft flying over Munich had less than 20 minutes of fuel remaining, and conventional recovery methods had failed completely. She was the only person present with the specialized knowledge necessary to prevent a catastrophic crash over civilian territory. Kara, I need you to focus on the immediate emergency, General Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. We can address the historical issues after we resolve the current crisis. Right. Now hundreds of lives depend on your expertise. Kara nodded, compartmentalizing her emotions about facing the commanding officer who had overseen the cover-up of her teammates' deaths. Her military training had taught her to prioritize mission objectives over personal concerns, and preventing civilian casualties was more important than pursuing justice for past crimes. She quickly analyzed the aircraft's telemetry data, identifying the specific system conflicts that were causing the erratic flight behavior. The remote control modifications had created multiple points of failure in the aircraft's navigation and flight control systems. The unauthorized technology was fighting against the aircraft's original programming, creating a feedback loop that was making the aircraft increasingly unstable. The problem is that your remote control systems are incompatible with the aircraft's original safety protocols, she explained as she worked. Every time the remote system tries to correct the flight path, the aircraft's autopilot interprets it as a system malfunction and tries to override the inputs. The conflict is creating exponential instability. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, despite his earlier hostility toward her investigation, was now handing on her every word. Can you regain control of the aircraft remotely? Not with the current system. Architecture, Kara replied, her fingers flying across multiple control interfaces simultaneously. But I can isolate the conflicting systems and restore the aircraft's original autopilot functionality. That should stabilize the flight path and allow for a controlled emergency landing. The technical work required all of her expertise in both aircraft systems and electronic warfare technology. She had to carefully disable the remote control modifications without damaging the aircraft's essential flight systems, a process that was complicated by the fact that the unauthorized technology had been integrated into critical aircraft components. As she worked, Kara was aware that the entire command center was watching her performance with a mixture of admiration and recognition. The same technical expertise that had made her dangerous to their conspiracy was now their only hope for preventing a disaster that would expose their illegal operations to international scrutiny. Isolating remote control interface, she announced, as she systematically disabled the unauthorized systems. Restoring original autopilot functionality. The aircraft should begin stabilizing within 60 seconds. The tension in the command center was palpable as everyone watched the aircraft's telemetry displays. Slowly, the erratic flight patterns began to smooth out as the aircraft's original systems regained control. The altitude stabilized, the course corrections became consistent, and the emergency indicators shifted from red to amber as the crisis gradually resolved. Aircraft is responding to standard autopilot commands, the lead technician reported with obvious relief. Flight path is stable, and we're coordinating with Munich Air Traffic Control for an emergency landing at a military airfield. General. Morrison placed his hand on Kara's shoulder as she completed the final system checks. Outstanding work, specialist. Your expertise just prevented what could have been a catastrophic international incident. The use of her former military rank was significant, acknowledging her service record and expertise in front of the entire command staff. But Kara noticed that Lieutenant Colonel Brennan and the unnamed civilian who had been present during her security interviews were watching the interaction with expressions of concern. They understood that her successful resolution of the crisis had validated all of her previous technical warnings about the remote control systems. General, this crisis was caused by exactly the type of system vulnerabilities I've been documenting in my maintenance reports, she said, making her concerns part of the official record. The remote control modifications create dangerous instabilities that put both military personnel and civilians at risk. Morrison nodded grimly. I want a full technical briefing on your findings. If these systems are as dangerous as today's incident suggests, we need to understand the full scope of the risks. As the immediate crisis concluded and the aircraft was successfully guided to an emergency landing, Kara realized that the situation had fundamentally changed. Her expertise had been publicly demonstrated and officially acknowledged, making it impossible for the conspiracy to continue dismissing her as psychologically unstable or technically incompetent. But she also understood that resolving the crisis had not eliminated the dangers she faced. The same people who had killed her teammates to protect this program were still in positions of authority, and they now knew that she possessed both the expertise and the evidence necessary to expose their illegal operations. The successful mission had saved hundreds of civilian lives, but had also escalated her personal risk to the highest possible level. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan approached her as the command center personnel began securing their equipment. Ms. Dee, we need to discuss the security implications of your unauthorized access to this facility. Your presence here raises serious questions about operational security. Kara met his gaze steadily, drawing on her military training to project confidence despite the obvious threat. Colonel, my presence here prevented a catastrophic aircraft crash that would have triggered international investigations into your entire operation. I suggest that the security implications you should be concerned about involve the illegal modifications that caused today's crisis. The confrontation was being witnessed by General Morrison and the entire command staff, creating an official record of her accusations and Brennan's response. The dynamics had shifted dramatically from her position as a dismissed civilian contractor to a recognized expert whose warnings had been vindicated by events. Following the successful resolution of the aircraft crisis, General Morrison ordered an immediate technical review of all remote control systems operating at Nordwind Air Base. Kara found herself in the unprecedented position of leading the investigation into the same illegal modifications she had been trying to expose for weeks. The crisis had transformed her from a suspected security risk into an essential technical expert whose expertise could not be dismissed or ignored. I want a comprehensive analysis of every aircraft that has been modified with remote control capabilities. Morrison instructed as he assembled a team of technical specialists in the main briefing room. Ms. Dee will provide technical oversight, given her demonstrated expertise with these systems. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's expression reflected barely controlled anger as he watched his conspiracy being systematically exposed by the very person he had tried to silence. "General, I must protest this decision. Ms. Dee's unauthorized access to classified facilities represents a serious security breach that should disqualify her from participating in any official investigation." "Colonel, Ms. Dee's unauthorized access to classified facilities is the reason we're not dealing with hundreds of civilian casualties and an international incident," Morrison replied firmly. "Her technical analysis of system vulnerabilities has been validated by events, and her expertise is clearly superior to that of our assigned personnel." The investigation revealed the full scope of the illegal operations that had been conducted at Nordwind Air Base. Over the past 3 years, the remote control program had modified 47 aircraft with unauthorized technology, conducting covert missions across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. The operations included surveillance, targeted strikes, and intelligence-gathering missions that had never been authorized by proper military or civilian authorities. Kara's analysis of the technical systems revealed that the modifications were far more extensive than she had initially discovered. The remote control technology had been integrated into aircraft navigation, communication, and weapon systems, allowing ground-based operators to conduct complete missions without the knowledge or consent of the official flight crews. In many cases, pilots believed they were conducting routine training exercises while their aircraft were actually performing classified combat operations. The modification patterns show systematic installation of remote control capabilities in aircraft assigned to multiple NATO bases, Kara reported to the investigation team. "This isn't limited to Nordwind Air Base. The same technology has been deployed across the entire European theater of operations." General Morrison's expression grew increasingly grim as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. "Are you saying that unauthorized personnel have been conducting military operations using NATO aircraft without the knowledge of the pilots or the official command structure?" "Sir, the evidence suggests that an entire shadow military operation has been running parallel to official NATO activities," Kara confirmed. "The remote control systems allow operators to take control of aircraft during flight, conduct unauthorized missions, and return the aircraft to their original flight plans without the pilots ever knowing what happened." The investigation also revealed the systematic elimination of military personnel who had discovered evidence of the illegal operations. The files that Kara had photographed during her infiltration of Hangar 12 contained detailed records of 43 cases where military members had been transferred, discharged, or eliminated after questioning unauthorized aircraft modifications or suspicious mission parameters. The 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron was disbanded because they discovered evidence of the remote control program, Kara explained, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of discussing her teammates' deaths. 7 members of my unit were killed when their aircraft was remotely controlled and crashed to prevent them from reporting their findings to congressional oversight committees. General Morrison reviewed the personnel files with obvious shock and disgust. These records document a systematic pattern of eliminating military personnel who threatened operational security. This isn't just an illegal weapons program. It's a conspiracy that has committed multiple murders to protect its operations. The most damaging discovery came when Kara's technical analysis revealed that the remote control systems had been used to conduct operations against civilian targets. The modification log showed that aircraft had been used for targeted assassinations, infrastructure attacks, and false flag operations designed to justify military interventions in foreign countries. Sir, this evidence suggests that the remote control program has been conducting unauthorized warfare operations that could constitute war crimes under international law, Kara reported. The technology has been used to attack civilian infrastructure and eliminate political targets without authorization from any legitimate government authority. The briefing room fell silent as the full implications of the conspiracy became clear. The illegal program had not only murdered military personnel to protect its secrecy, but had also used military aircraft to conduct unauthorized attacks against civilian targets in multiple countries. The operations represented a complete breakdown of military discipline and civilian oversight. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan made one final attempt to contain the investigation. General, this entire briefing is based on the unauthorized activities of a civilian contractor who gained access to classified facilities through illegal means. Her claims cannot be substantiated without compromising ongoing operational security. General. Morrison's response was decisive and final. Colonel, the operational security that you're trying to protect involves the murder of military personnel and unauthorized attacks against civilian targets. I'm placing you under arrest pending investigation for conspiracy, murder, and violations of international law. As military police arrested Brennan and secured the classified evidence, Kara realized that her 3-year quest for justice was finally reaching its conclusion. The conspiracy that had killed her teammates was being exposed, and the people responsible were facing the consequences of their crimes. But she also understood that the investigation was just beginning, and that the full scope of the illegal operations would take months or years to uncover completely. General Morrison approached her. As the briefing concluded, Ms. Dee, your courage in pursuing this investigation has prevented future casualties and exposed crimes that might never have been discovered. Your teammates would be proud of what you've accomplished. Looking down at the faded unit tattoo on her wrist, Kara felt a sense of closure that had eluded her for 3 years. The truth about the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron's fate was finally being acknowledged, and justice was finally being served for the 7 people who had died, protecting their country from the very institution they had sworn to serve. 6 months later, Kara stood before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, delivering testimony that would reshape military accountability and international law. The investigation into the remote control conspiracy had expanded across 3 continents, exposing a network of illegal operations that had been conducted by rogue military elements for over a decade. Her technical expertise and unwavering pursuit of truth had become the foundation for the most significant military justice case in modern history. The courtroom was packed with family members of the military personnel who had been eliminated. To protect the conspiracy, journalists documenting the historic proceedings, and military officials from dozens of countries whose aircraft had been compromised by the illegal modifications. Kara's testimony had already led to criminal convictions of 47 military and civilian personnel, including Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, who received a life sentence without possibility of parole. Ms. Dee, the chief prosecutor addressed her from the witness stand. Your investigation ultimately revealed that the remote control program had been responsible for unauthorized military operations in 12 countries, resulting in over 300 civilian casualties. Can you explain how a single maintenance contractor was able to expose what multiple intelligence agencies had failed to detect? Kara looked out at the audience, her eyes finding the families of her fallen teammates who had traveled from around the world to witness this moment of vindication. Your Honor, the conspiracy succeeded for so long because it systematically eliminated anyone with the technical expertise to recognize what was happening. Military personnel who questioned unauthorized modifications were transferred, discharged, or killed before they could expose the illegal operations. Her voice carried the weight of 3 years of investigation and the memory of 7 colleagues who had died for the truth. The 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron discovered evidence of the remote control program in 2021. When they prepared to report their findings to congressional oversight committees, they were murdered to prevent the exposure of the conspiracy. I survived only because I was grounded due to injury during their final mission. The prosecutor continued. The evidence you gathered at Nordwind Air Base documented not only the technical aspects of the illegal program, but also the systematic cover-up that protected it. How significant was your military background and understanding these operations? My service with the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron provided me with specialized knowledge of aircraft systems and electronic warfare technology that most maintenance personnel wouldn't possess, Kara explained. But more importantly, my personal connection to the conspiracy's victims gave me the motivation to continue investigating, despite institutional resistance and personal threats. General Morrison, who had been promoted to head the new International Military Accountability Division, sat in the gallery watching the proceedings. His decision to support Kara's investigation had cost him politically, but had ultimately prevented a wider international scandal. When the full scope of the illegal operations became public, the court's final judgment established new international protocols for military aircraft security and created oversight mechanisms to prevent unauthorized modifications of weapons systems. The Kara Dee Protocol, as it became known, required multiple independent verification of any changes to military aircraft systems and established whistleblower protections for military personnel who reported suspicious activities. Following the trial, Kara accepted a position as Director of Aircraft Security for the newly established NATO Integrity Commission, tasked with preventing future conspiracies and protecting military personnel who reported illegal activities. Her office was located in Brussels, but she frequently traveled to military bases around the world, training personnel to recognize unauthorized modifications and establishing secure reporting channels for security concerns. On the third anniversary of her teammates' deaths, Kara stood in Arlington National Cemetery at the memorial dedicated to the members of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron. Their names were now officially recognized, their service acknowledged, and their sacrifice honored. The memorial inscription read, "They died defending truth against those who would corrupt it." Staff Sergeant Eric Volkov, who had been promoted and transferred to her team, joined her at the memorial. His early support during her investigation had been crucial to its success, and his technical expertise had helped expand the investigation to bases across Europe. "Kara, the families wanted me to give you this," he said, handing her a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of personal items from each of the 7 fallen members of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron. Photos, letters, and small mementos that their families had chosen to honor their memory. "They wanted you to know that your courage gave meaning to their sacrifice," Volkov continued. "Because of your investigation, their deaths were not in vain." Kara closed the box carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility and remembrance. The conspiracy had been exposed, justice had been served, and new protections had been established to prevent future tragedies. But the most important victory was that 7 heroes were finally recognized for choosing truth over convenience. Courage over safety. As she walked away from the memorial, Kara touched the unit tattoo on her wrist one final time. The faded insignia would always remind her that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by generals or politicians, but by ordinary people who refuse to let injustice prevail. The truth had finally come home. 6 months later, Kara stood before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, delivering testimony that would reshape military accountability and international law. The investigation into the remote control conspiracy had expanded across 3 continents, exposing a network of illegal operations that had been conducted by rogue military elements for over a decade. Her technical expertise and unwavering pursuit of truth had become the foundation for the most significant military justice case in modern history. The courtroom was packed with family members of the military personnel who had been eliminated. To protect the conspiracy, journalists documenting the historic proceedings, and military officials from dozens of countries whose aircraft had been compromised by the illegal modifications. Kara's testimony had already led to criminal convictions of 47 military and civilian personnel, including Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, who received a life sentence without possibility of parole. Ms. Dee, the chief prosecutor addressed her from the witness stand. Your investigation ultimately revealed that the remote control program had been responsible for unauthorized military operations in 12 countries, resulting in over 300 civilian casualties. Can you explain how a single maintenance contractor was able to expose what multiple intelligence agencies had failed to detect? Kara looked out at the audience, her eyes finding the families of her fallen teammates who had traveled from around the world to witness this moment of vindication. Your Honor, the conspiracy succeeded for so long because it systematically eliminated anyone with the technical expertise to recognize what was happening. Military personnel who questioned unauthorized modifications were transferred, discharged, or killed before they could expose the illegal operations. Her voice carried the weight of 3 years of investigation and the memory of 7 colleagues who had died for the truth. The 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron discovered evidence of the remote control program in 2021. When they prepared to report their findings to congressional oversight committees, they were murdered to prevent the exposure of the conspiracy. I survived only because I was grounded due to injury during their final mission. The prosecutor continued, the evidence you gathered at Nordwind Air Base documented not only the technical aspects of the illegal program, but also the systematic cover-up that protected it. How significant was your military background and understanding these operations? My service with the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron provided me with specialized knowledge of aircraft systems and electronic warfare technology that most maintenance personnel wouldn't possess, Kara explained. But more importantly, my personal connection to the conspiracy's victims gave me the motivation to continue investigating, despite institutional resistance and personal threats. General Morrison, who had been promoted to head the new International Military Accountability Division, sat in the gallery watching the proceedings. His decision to support Kara's investigation had cost him politically, but had ultimately prevented a wider international scandal. When the full scope of the illegal operations became public, the court's final judgment established new international protocols for military aircraft security and created oversight mechanisms to prevent unauthorized modifications of weapons systems. The Kara Dee Protocol, as it became known, required multiple independent verification of any changes to military aircraft systems and established whistleblower protections for military personnel who reported suspicious activities. Following the trial, Kara accepted a position as Director of Aircraft Security for the newly established NATO Integrity Commission, tasked with preventing future conspiracies and protecting military personnel who reported illegal activities. Her office was located in Brussels, but she frequently traveled to military bases around the world, training personnel to recognize unauthorized modifications and establishing secure reporting channels for security concerns. On the 3rd anniversary of her teammates' deaths, Kara stood in Arlington National Cemetery at the memorial dedicated to the members of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron. Their names were now officially recognized, their service acknowledged, and their sacrifice honored. The memorial inscription read, "They died defending truth against those who would corrupt it." Staff Sergeant Eric Volkov, who had been promoted and transferred to her team, joined her at the memorial. His early support during her investigation had been crucial to its success, and his technical expertise had helped expand the investigation to bases across Europe. Kara, the families wanted me to give you this, he said, handing her a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of personal items from each of the 7 fallen members of the 47th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron. Photos, letters, and small mementos that their families had chosen to honor their memory. They wanted you to know That your courage gave meaning to their sacrifice, Volkov continued. Because of your investigation, their deaths were not in vain. Kara closed the box carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility and remembrance. The conspiracy had been exposed, justice had been served, and new protections had been established to prevent future tragedies. But the most important victory was that 7 heroes were finally recognized for choosing truth over convenience. Courage over safety. As she walked away from the memorial, Kara touched the unit tattoo on her wrist one final time. The faded insignia would always remind her that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by generals or politicians, but by ordinary people who refuse to let injustice prevail. The truth had finally come home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.